Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are walking into the operating room to perform a structural autopsy on the modern state.
Mhm.
We aren't looking at a specific scandal or a specific war, but rather the machinery that makes those scandals, well, almost inevitable.
We are doing a deep dive into Crises of the Republic by Hannah Arendt. Now, usually when people hear the name Hannah Arendt, they immediately jump to the origins of totalitarianism or, the phrase, the banality of evil regarding the Nazis. But this book is different.
Very different.
This is Arendt turning her eyes to the American Republic in the late 1960s and early 70s. She's looking at Vietnam, the Pentagon Papers, the student movements, and she's asking a question that I think feels incredibly, incredibly modern.
Mm-hmm.
How do governments lose their grip on reality?
It's a terrifying question. And to be clear, she's not asking how governments make mistakes. I mean, everyone makes mistakes. She is asking how a government constructs a completely fictional world, lives inside it, and then dismantles its own power just to protect that fiction.
Right. And that's the central tension we're going to explore today, this conflict between image making, what we might call PR or propaganda, and factual truth.
That's the battleground.
And our mission today is to understand her argument that deception in modern politics isn't an anomaly. It's not about bad apples or a single corrupt president. It is a systemic feature of bureaucracy itself.
Exactly. It's built into the machine. So we have a lot of ground to cover to really do this justice. We're going to break this into three main pillars, really.
Okay.
First, we're going to look at the architecture of lying, specifically how these so-called problem solvers and PR experts created, well, a hallucination called the Vietnam War.
Right.
Second, we have to do some heavy lifting on definitions. We need to distinguish between violence and power, because Arendt argues they're actually opposites, which sounds completely wrong until you really dig into it.
And I definitely want to get into that. What's the third pillar?
And finally, we'll look at civil disobedience and her really radical idea for a council system of government as a potential way out.
So let's unpack this. We have to start with the catalyst for the book, the Pentagon Papers. For those who maybe, fell asleep in history class, can you set the scene for us? What exactly were these papers?
Right. So in 1967, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, he commissioned this massive study. He wanted a comprehensive, unvarnished history of the United States decision-making process regarding Vietnam.
And this wasn't just a memo.
Oh, no. This was not a pamphlet. It was 47 volumes, 7,000 pages of analysis, internal documents, cables, just a mountain of information.
That is a staggering amount of paperwork.
It is, and it was, of course, top secret. Arendt calls it a well-guarded secret inside the machine. But here's the first detail that she just latches onto, and it sets the tone for everything else.
What's that?
Barely anyone read them.
Wait. They commissioned a 7,000-page study to understand the war, and then nobody actually read it.
The people actually making the decisions, the President, the National Security Council, they didn't have the time or, frankly, the inclination to wade through 47 volumes. They were too busy managing the war to read the history of how they got there.
The irony is just staggering.
It is. But then, when the papers were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg to the press, the public finally got a look inside. And the shocking revelation wasn't just that the government had made bad calls or had lied to the public. We kind of expect that.
Mm-hmm.
It was that the decision makers were systematically lying, not just to the public, but to themselves.
Okay, this is the part I really want to drill down on. We all assume politicians lie. It's practically a cliche, right? How do you know a politician is lying? His lips are moving.
Right.
But Arendt seems to think this was a different kind of lying, a different category altogether.
It was. It wasn't just about avoiding an uncomfortable truth. It was a fundamental disconnection from reality. And to understand it, Arendt starts by making a philosophical point that is actually quite tricky to grasp at first, but it's absolutely essential. She talks about the fragility of facts.
Facts are fragile. That sounds, well, counterintuitive. I think of facts as rocks, hard, immovable. 2 + 2 = 4.
Ah, but Arendt would say you're mixing two different things. She distinguishes between rational truth and factual truth.
Okay, break that down.
2 + 2 = 4 is a rational truth. It's a mathematical necessity. It exists outside of human events. You can't really lie about it effectively because anyone can just check the math. It's self-evident.
Okay, I'm with you.
But factual truth is different. Factual truth is something like Germany invaded Belgium in August 1914.
Okay. But that's also a rock, isn't it? It happened. It's a fact.
It happened, yes. But it is what she calls contingent. That means it didn't have to happen. Germany could have chosen to invade France directly. They could have stayed home. Because factual events are contingent, because they depend on human choices and a million other variables, they are vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
They can be rewritten.
Hmm.
If you have enough power, you can destroy all the books, you can kill all the witnesses, you can forge new documents, and you can effectively change the fact that Germany invaded Belgium. You can erase it from the collective memory.
I see. So because reality is just a series of things that happen but didn't need to happen, it's much easier to manipulate than, say, a mathematical equation.
Exactly. And this brings us to the nature of the lie. This is so important. Arendt argues that a lie is often more plausible, more convincing than reality.
Why on earth would that be?
Because a liar has the great advantage of knowing beforehand what the audience wishes or expects to hear. Reality is messy, it's complicated, it's full of contradictions and loose ends. It rarely fits a clean narrative.
But a lie.
A lie can be crafted. It can be designed to be perfectly logical, perfectly coherent. It satisfies our deep-seated desire for the world to make sense.
That is actually disturbing. You're saying we might prefer the lie because it's a better story than the truth.
In a way, yes. Arendt argues that for the modern problem solver or the bureaucrat, reality is just annoying. It's an inconvenience. It doesn't fit the model. So lying isn't just about hiding a crime or an embarrassment. It's about fixing the narrative. It's about making the world look rational and manageable.
And this leads us to the specific group of people who were running the Vietnam War. She talks about the influence of Madison Avenue, the advertising industry.
Yes, this is a crucial connection she makes. She traces this shift where the government started importing the mentality of public relations directly into governance. Now think about what a PR man does. Does a PR man actually fix the engine of a faulty car?
No, of course not. He fixes the ad campaign for the car. He manages the car's reputation, its image.
Precisely. His goal isn't action, it's opinion, it's creating goodwill. He can't change the fact that the engine is broken, but he can change how we perceive the car.
I see where this is going.
When you bring that mindset into the Pentagon, the goal shifts from winning the war, which is an action in the real world, to creating the image of winning the war, which is a matter of opinion.
And when that becomes the primary mode of government, you get what she calls the defactualization of the war.
This is where the problem solvers come in. These were the men Robert McNamara brought into the Defense Department in the 60s. They weren't career soldiers. They were intellectuals. They came from Harvard, from big think tanks like the Rand Corporation.
The famous whiz kids.
Right. And they were brilliant. No one denies that. But they were brilliant in a very specific, and Arendt argues, a very dangerous way. They were trained in game theory, systems analysis, and statistics. They truly believed that you could solve a war the same way you solve a logistics problem at Ford Motor Company.
I want to get specific here because the critique often is that we just say, they used math, and then move on. What did this actually look like on the ground? How do you turn a messy guerrilla war into a math problem?
You create metrics. That's the key. If you can't measure victory in the traditional sense, like territory taken, because in Vietnam the front lines moved every single night, you have to invent a proxy for victory.
And that proxy was the body count?
The body count, the kill ratio. The theory was grimly simple. If we kill more of them than they kill of us, eventually they will run out of soldiers. It's a mathematical certainty, right? It's a war of attrition on a spreadsheet.
So the entire war machine, from the generals in Saigon down to the lieutenants in the field, was geared toward producing these numbers.
Exactly. Commanders were evaluated on their body counts. Their promotions depended on it.
Which inevitably leads to inflation. I mean, it's just human nature. If my career depends on me killing 50 enemies this month, I'm going to report 50 enemies, even if I only found 10.
Or you count dead civilians as enemies. Or you call in an airstrike on a village and estimate the casualties. The data became completely corrupted. And it wasn't just body counts. There was another system called the HES, the Hamlet Evaluation System.
I've heard of this.
They had 18 different criteria to measure how pacified a village was. You know, things like, does the school have a pro-government teacher? They would punch all these numbers into a computer, and the computer would print out a neat report saying 90% of South Vietnam is secure.
Meanwhile, the Viet Congers are basically running the countryside as soon as the sun goes down.
Exactly. This is what Arendt means by defactualization. The problem solvers were looking at the charts, not the country. They were filtering out any intelligence report, any human testimony that contradicted their theory.
And she mentions that some parts of the government were telling the truth.
Right. Yes, and this is so important. The intelligence services, the CIA, independent analysts. They were actually sending back brutally honest reports. They were saying the bombing campaign isn't working. Enemy morale is high. This whole pacification program is a joke.
But the guys at the top, the decision makers, they just didn't listen.
They couldn't listen. To listen would be to admit that their beautiful, logical, systems theory model of the war was completely wrong. And for a technocrat, for a problem solver, the model is everything.
The map is more important than the territory.
Precisely. Arendt argues they were more afraid of admitting they were wrong than they were of actually losing the war. So the goal shifted. It went from winning to avoiding a humiliating defeat. And eventually it became purely psychological, winning the people's minds, or really just maintaining the image of American competence.
There's an anecdote Arendt uses that I think captures the psychology of self-deception perfectly, the medieval century story.
Oh, it's a classic, a perfect little fable for this.
Walk us through it, because I think it explains how incredibly smart people can delude themselves so completely.
Okay, so you have to picture a walled town in the Middle Ages. There's a sentry standing on the watchtower late at night. He's bored. Maybe he wants to stir things up a bit.
Okay.
So as a prank, he sounds the alarm. He rings the big bell and starts screaming at the top of his lungs, "The enemy is coming! The enemy is coming!"
Just to mess with people. A complete fabrication.
A total lie. But immediately, the town wakes up. The alarm spreads. The guards rush out of the barracks, buckling on their armor. The women grab their children and run for the cellars. The men grab their pitchforks and axes. Everyone is running to the walls, terrified, staring out at the dark horizon. The panic is total. It is visceral. You can feel it.
And the sentry on the tower.
The sentry watches all of this unfold. He sees the sheer scale of the reaction. He sees the absolute conviction on everyone's faces. And suddenly he thinks to himself, well, they can't all be crazy. And he, the original liar, runs to the wall to help defend the town against the enemy he knows isn't there.
Wow. He believes his own lie because everyone else believed it so convincingly.
It's the feedback loops. That's the whole point. Arendt applies this directly to the Johnson and Nixon administrations. They sold the image of progress and victory so effectively to the public and to Congress that they started to believe the falsified reports coming back across their own desks.
They knew, at least initially, that they were spinning things.
Of course. But eventually, the spin became the only reality they had access to. The image replaced the fact, even for its creators.
It's like they built a virtual reality headset, put it on the American public, and then got so caught up in the marketing that they put one on themselves, too. And this created what was famous at the time, the credibility gap.
Right, and we use that term loosely now to just mean people don't trust the government. But Arendt describes it as a true abyss. It wasn't just that the public didn't trust the president. It was a situation where the government no longer believed its own intelligence. The internal communication system completely broke down.
How does that happen structurally? I mean, I get the president living in a bubble, but what about the colonels and the generals on the ground? They must have known.
They did, but it's the shoot the messenger problem.
Yeah.
Institutionalized on a massive scale. Arendt quotes this one chilling exchange that just says it all. An American commander is talking to a subordinate in the field. This subordinate is trying to report the truth that the Viet Cong still control his sector.
He's trying to report facts.
He is, and the commander says to him, "Son, you're writing our own report card in this country. Why are you failing us?"
Oh, man, why are you failing us? That's heavy. It's not what is the truth. It's give me the data that proves I'm doing a good job and that the system is working.
Exactly. When the bureaucracy is evaluated on progress, every single layer of the hierarchy has a powerful incentive to lie to the layer above it. The lieutenant lies to the captain lies to the colonel lies to the general, and the general presents a beautiful, completely falsified chart to the president in the Oval Office.
And the president sits at the top of this pyramid of lies, what Arendt calls the ideal victim of total manipulation.
It's so counterintuitive. We think the president is the most powerful man on earth, the person with access to the most information. Arendt says no. Because of the sheer immensity of the job, he is completely, utterly dependent on his national security managers to filter reality for him.
His choices are basically predetermined by what information he's allowed to see.
Completely. If his advisors are all problem solvers who are addicted to their own theories and their own metrics, the president is effectively piloting the ship of state from inside a sensory deprivation tank. He's flying blind.
So to recap this first part, we have a government living in a fantasy world of its own creation. We have a public that is slowly starting to realize that the emperor has no clothes. And this leads to a massive crisis of authority. Which brings us, I think, to the second major pillar of this book, the nature of power and violence.
This is, in my opinion, Arendt's single most significant contribution to political theory. And it's also the hardest part to wrap your head around, because she demands that we stop and redefine the words we use every single day.
Right. We tend to use power, violence, strength, and authority almost as synonyms. We say, the dictator is powerful. Or, the police used force to clear the crowd. Arendt says, stop. These are all totally different things.
And if you mix them up, she argues, you cannot possibly understand politics. It leads to political disaster.
Okay, I want to try to make this concrete. Let's try to gamify this a little bit. I'm going to give you a scenario, and you tell me which Arendt concept it fits. Power, strength, force, authority, or violence.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Okay, scenario one. A single man walks into a bank with his shotgun. He yells at everyone to get on the floor. Everyone obeys him. Does he have power?
No. He has violence. For Arendt, violence is instrumental. It's a tool, in this case, this shotgun used to multiply his natural strength. He can force obedience, but only as long as he holds the gun. The moment he puts it down, it's gone.
Okay. Scenario two. The Pope steps out onto a balcony in St. Peter's Square. He simply raises his hand. The massive crowd of thousands goes silent. No guns, no threats.
That is authority. Authority requires unquestioning recognition from those who are asked to obey. He doesn't need to persuade you. He doesn't say, hey guys, I have some good reasons for you to be quiet. And he doesn't need to coerce you with violence. You obey because you recognize the institution and the hierarchy as legitimate.
Makes sense. Okay, scenario three. A dictator sits alone in his palace. He shouts an order into the intercom, but his guards have all deserted. The people in the streets are ignoring him completely.
He has nothing.
Yeah.
He has no power. And this gets to Arendt's most crucial definition. Power, for her, corresponds to the human ability to act in concert. It belongs to a group. It is never, ever the property of an individual.
So a dictator only has power insofar as the group, the army, the police, the people agrees to act with him and carry out his orders.
Always. Power arises from people coming together and acting with a common purpose. The moment the group disperses or withdraws its consent, the power vanishes. Just like that.
Okay, last one. A champion weightlifter. He can bench press 500 pounds.
That is strength. Strength is an individual property. It's a characteristic of a person or an object, but, and this is the key distinction, the strength of the strongest individual can always be overpowered by the power of the many. Think of Gulliver. He was strong. The Lilliputians acting together had power.
Okay, so this semantic drill is fascinating, but why does it matter so much? Why is Arendt so obsessed with getting these definitions just right?
Because once you accept her definitions, she arrives at a conclusion that flips our entire understanding of the world upside down. She says, power and violence are opposites.
And she follows that with, where the one rules absolutely, the other is absent.
Exactly. We tend to think violence is the ultimate manifestation of power. You know, oh, the government is sending in the tanks. They're really showing their power now. Arendt says, no, that is the exact opposite of the truth. They are sending in the tanks because they have lost power.
Okay, you have to walk me through that. That still feels wrong.
Okay, think of a healthy, functioning democracy. The government passes a law, say a speed limit. 99% of people follow it. Why? It's not because there's a cop in their living room with a gun.
Right.
They follow it because of power. Because they consent to the system as a whole, they're acting in concert with the law. The government's legitimacy relies on that bedrock of support.
But if people stop following the law, if that consensus starts to break down.
And the government panics. It has lost its power, its legitimacy. So it sends in the riot police. It uses tear gas. It uses batons. It uses violence. Why? Because the power is gone. The voluntary consent has evaporated, and violence is the only tool it has left.
So the more violence a state has to use against its own people, the weaker it actually is.
Precisely. Violence can destroy power. You can shoot the protesters and clear the square for a day, but violence can never create power. You cannot shoot your way into legitimacy. Arendt writes, to speak of nonviolent power is redundant. Power, by its very nature, is nonviolent because it relies on agreement, not coercion.
That puts the whole Vietnam War era in a completely new light. You had the National Guard shooting students at Kent State. You had police beating protesters in the streets of Chicago. We look at that and we see a powerful, tyrannical government. Arendt looks at that and sees a government in its death throes. She sees impotence.
She sees a government that has lost the ability to persuade and is resorting to the only tool it has left, the club. And this brings her to this terrifying description of modern bureaucracy. She calls it the rule by nobody.
This is the tyranny without a tyrant.
Yes. In a traditional tyranny, you have a king or a dictator. You know who is oppressing you. You can hate him. You can, try to revolt against him. But in a massive modern bureaucracy, who is actually responsible?
The person behind the desk says, sorry, I'm just following the rules. The manager says, look, I'm just implementing policy from above. The president says, I'm just relying on the data from the problem solvers.
Exactly. There is no one to argue with. There is no one to present your grievances to. Everyone is deprived of political freedom because no one actually has the power to act. They only have the job of administering a system. Arendt argues this is the most formidable and insidious form of dominion because it is faceless and nameless.
And that feeling of screaming into the void, of being crushed by a machine that has no driver, that is what ultimately breeds violence from the other side, from the people.
It creates a pressure cooker. If you can't be heard, if you can't persuade, if you can't change the system through normal channels, you might throw a brick through a window. Not because you think the brick will build a new government, but because the brick is the only way to make the machine stop and notice you, even for a second. It's an assertion of your existence against the faceless machine.
Okay, so this brings us to the reaction. We have a government living in a PR bubble, detached from reality. We have a bureaucracy where no one is responsible. Power is eroding. Violence is rising. And in the middle of all this, you have the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, you have civil disobedience.
And this is where Arendt gets really interesting and, for the time, quite controversial. She argues the U.S. was facing a constitutional crisis of the first order. The consensus universalis, that universal consent that holds the country together, was breaking down.
People were actively withdrawing their consent from the system.
There were. And the legal system had no idea how to handle it. Arendt spends a lot of time carefully distinguishing between the criminal and the civil disobedient.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. From the perspective of law and order, isn't a lawbreaker just a lawbreaker? I mean, if you block traffic for a protest, you're breaking the law. If you rob a bank, you're breaking the law. Why should we treat the protester any differently than the bank robber?
It's a completely valid question, and it's one the courts still struggle with today. But Arendt argues the structure of the act, the why and the how, are completely different. Let's look at the criminal first. The bank robber. What does he want?
He wants the money. It's for personal gain.
Right. He wants an exception just for himself. He wants to be able to steal the money, but he wants everyone else to keep following the law so that the bank exists and the roads are safe for his getaway car. He acts in secret. He hides. He operates for private gain.
Okay, now contrast that with the civil disobedient, the lunch counter sit-in protester.
Does he hide?
No, the opposite.
Yeah.
He calls the press. He stands in the middle of the street. He wants to be seen. He wants to be arrested to make his point.
Exactly. He operates in public. And crucially, he acts in the name of a group, of a shared principle. He isn't saying, I want to break this segregation law for my own personal profit. He is saying, we, this group, believe this law is fundamentally unjust and illegitimate. He is challenging the validity of the law itself, not trying to sneak around it.
So the criminal evades the law. The civil disobedient confronts the law.
That's a perfect way to put it. And Arendt directly challenges that slippery slope argument you hear all the time, the idea that if we let people protest this, next they'll be murdering and looting. She says the criminal mind and the rebel mind are fundamentally different psychologies.
One is selfish and private. The other is political and public.
Yes. Civil disobedience is a form of political action, and Arendt links it to this uniquely American tradition of voluntary associations.
This goes all the way back to de Tocqueville, right? The idea that Americans, more than anyone, love to form clubs and committees and groups to get things done.
It does. Americans have a genius for organizing from the ground up. Arendt argues that civil disobedience is just the latest form of this tradition. It arises when the standard channels of change voting, lobbying, writing your representative have become clogged or unresponsive.
So when the representative system acts as a buffer against change rather than a vehicle for it, people have to find another way to participate and make their voices heard.
They have to create their own power by acting in concert. But the law struggles with this because the law is built to deal with individuals.
Right. You are indicted as John Smith. You aren't indicted as the anti-war movement. So when you stand up in court, the legal system strips away all the political context and just treats you like a common lawbreaker. Arendt argues we need to find a place in our legal and constitutional structure to accommodate this kind of group dissent because it's the only thing that keeps the spirit of the republic alive when the institutions fail. It's like she's saying civil disobedience is actually the cure, not the disease. It's reality breaking back into the government's PR bubble.
Exactly. When the government's image says everyone supports the war and then 100,000 people march on Washington, that is a fact-destroying an image. It's a moment of truth.
So let's try to synthesize all this. We call this deep dive crisis in perception. How do these three threads, lying, violence, and disobedience, all tie together into a single system?
It's a feedback loop of decay, a downward spiral. Let's try to trace it step by step.
Okay.
Step 1. The government, controlled by problem solvers and PR men, replaces factual reality with a constructed, more convenient image. That's the lie.
Step 2.
This constant lying erodes the shared reality. If we don't even agree on the basic facts of what's happening, we can't possibly act together.
And when we can't act together, power vanishes. Because, as you said, power is acting in concert.
Exactly. So step 3 is the disappearance of power. Step 4. When the government loses its power, its support, its consent, its legitimacy, it panics. It turns to the only tools it has left: bureaucratic rigidity, the rule by nobody, or direct violence.
And that leads to step 5. The people, seeing that the social contract has been broken, engage in civil disobedience to publicly withdraw their consent and challenge the government's lies.
That's the loop. Lie, loss of reality, loss of power, turn to violence, public dissent.
And what happens if the government refuses to listen to that civil disobedience, if it just doubles down on the violence?
Then you get the total collapse of authority, the final stage.
There is a small story from the book that I think illustrates this collapse better than any grand theory: the New York subway story.
It's such a small, perfect anecdote. So picture the New York subway during rush hour. A crowded train pulls into a station, and there's a minor malfunction with one of the doors. It won't close properly.
Happens all the time in a big city.
Right. A totally normal inconvenience. The conductor gets on the PA system and gives a standard order. Everyone off the train, please. This train is being taken out of service.
The standard procedure.
Usually people grumble, they complain, but they get off the train. But this time, nobody moved. They just sat there, staring ahead.
Why? What were they protesting?
That's the thing. They weren't protesting the war. They weren't revolutionaries. They were just done. The conductor repeated the order, more forcefully. Nothing. The station manager came down to the platform and yelled at them. Nothing. For 4 hours, 50,000 passengers on that entire subway line were delayed because this one car full of people simply refused to follow a direct, reasonable order.
That is just bizarre and deeply unsettling.
It illustrates the total collapse of authority. Authority depends on an unspoken, unconscious presumption that the people in charge know what they are doing and have your best interests at heart. If that fundamental trust is gone, an order is just noise. The passengers simply didn't recognize the legitimacy of the command anymore.
That is a government's worst nightmare. Not a violent rebellion, but the moment people just quietly say, no. Not fighting, not shooting, just absolute passive non-compliance.
That is the loss of power in its purest form. And Arendt warns that we are heading toward a future where this becomes the norm if we continue to let technocrats and problem solvers rule us. She has a very colorful description of the future she fears for the intellectuals in politics.
Are you talking about the super civilized monkeys?
Chuckles.
Yes.
Yeah, she warns of an era of super civilized monkeys or men turned into chickens or rats, ruled by an elite who derive their power not from the people, but from the wise counsels of computers.
That sounds suspiciously like the world of big data and algorithms we live in right now.
It really does, doesn't it? She feared a world where decision-making is completely divorced from human reality and lived experience, handed over to artificial brains and abstract statistical models. In that world, the citizen is no longer a participant, they're just a data point, a consumer to be managed or a rat in a maze to be controlled.
So after all this critique, is there a way out? Arendt isn't exactly known as an optimist. She doesn't really write happy endings. But she does offer an alternative, doesn't she? She talks about the council system.
She does, and I'll be honest, this is the most radical and maybe the most debated part of the book.
I have to admit, when I first read this section, I was pretty skeptical. I hear council system, and I immediately think of endless, tedious committee meetings. I think of my homeowners association arguing for 3 hours about the approved color of a fence. Does she really think this is a viable way to run a modern nation state?
It's a very fair skepticism, but we have to understand what she's contrasting it with. Her primary target here is the party system.
What's wrong with political parties? They're how modern democracy works.
Arendt argues that party politics is fundamentally vertical. You, the citizen, vote for a guy. That guy goes to the Capitol and votes for another guy who then runs the country. Once you cast your ballot, your job is done. You go home. You have effectively surrendered your power to your representative. You become passive.
Okay. And the council system is the alternative.
She sees it as horizontal. She looks back through history at the American Revolution with its townships, the French Revolution, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. She notices that every time the central government collapses, people spontaneously organize themselves from the ground up into small groups, councils, or Soviets in Russia before the Bolsheviks crushed them.
What does this look like on a practical level?
It starts with the most basic unit you can imagine, a group of 10 or 20 people. They could be neighbors, coworkers, members of a club. They sit around a table.
Okay, 10 people at a table.
They debate. They discuss the issues that affect their neighborhood or their factory. And they form an opinion. This is the key for Arendt. They aren't just voting on a prepackaged choice A or B, presented by a party. They are thinking together, persuading each other, and creating a new opinion out of that discussion. Then they select one person from their group to represent their newly formed opinion at the next level up.
And that next council, made up of representatives from the base councils, meets, debates, and sends someone up to the next level, and so on.
Exactly. It builds upward like a pyramid, but the foundation, the source of all power, is the constant participation and deliberation at the base.
But here's my big issue with it. Who has the time for this? I have a job. I have kids. I don't want to spend my Tuesday nights debating foreign policy with my neighbor Bob, who thinks the earth is flat.
Arendt completely anticipates this objection. She talks about the formation of a new political elite.
Whoa, now hold on. Elite is a very dirty word in politics.
She's reclaiming it. She doesn't mean an elite of wealth or birth or even intelligence. She means a self-selected elite of caring.
An elite of caring.
In the council system, no one is forced to participate. If you just want to live your private life, go to your job and raise your family, you can. You can stay home. But, and here's the crucial trade-off, you have to accept that public decisions will be made without you.
So the elite are simply the people who bother to show up.
Exactly. It's a system that rewards engagement, not just fundraising ability or name recognition. Currently, our political elites are people who are very good at navigating party bureaucracies and raising enormous sums of money. Arendt wants an elite of people who are actually willing to do the hard work of public thinking and deliberation.
It still sounds utopian, idealistic.
She admits it might be. She's very clear-eyed about it. She notes that the council system has perished every time and everywhere it has appeared.
Well, that's not exactly a great track record.
No. It's usually crushed by the established party bureaucracy or by a dictator who can't stand the competition. The Bolsheviks in Russia, for example, immediately crushed the workers' councils, the original Soviets, because the councils were too democratic and too independent. But Arendt argues it is the only true alternative to the party system that has ever spontaneously appeared in history. It keeps coming back. Because for her, it is the natural shape of human freedom in action.
She has that great line about the voting booth being too small for freedom.
The booth only fits one. For Arendt, true freedom isn't just the right to choose between two candidates once every few years. It's the ability to participate in the public determination of the country's fate. It's about being an actor on the stage, not just a spectator in the audience.
And if we had that level of genuine participation, we wouldn't need the lying.
We wouldn't need the lying because we would be dealing with reality together, in public. And we wouldn't need the violence because the government is the people, organized. Power would be constantly regenerated from the ground up.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for us today? We aren't in 1971. We don't have the Vietnam War hanging over us. But we certainly have our own crisis in perception.
We absolutely do. We have social media algorithms that feed us confirmed biases and create separate realities. We have a political polarization so deep that acting in concert on almost any issue seems impossible. We have a deep, corrosive suspicion of all our institutions.
And we definitely have our own problem solvers in Silicon Valley who believe they can engineer a perfect society with the right code.
The central lesson of Crises of the Republic is that truth is not a given in politics. It is not a stable rock. It is a fragile thing that must be constantly fought for and defended. The structural tendency of any large system is always toward the image, toward the convenient lie, toward the smooth and unaccountable functioning of bureaucracy.
It's just easier to spin the story than it is to fix the underlying reality.
Always. And when we feel that sense of unreality, when the official narrative from the top doesn't match what we see with our own eyes, that is the warning sign. That is the crisis Arendt is talking about.
And the greatest danger in that moment is cynicism.
Yes. If we just conclude that everything is a lie and they're all corrupt, then we check out. We become passive. And a passive, cynical population is the easiest thing in the world to manipulate with more images and more lies. Or we become violent. Arendt wants us to choose a third path: action, participation, civil disobedience if necessary, but to always stay engaged with the difficult, messy reality of the world.
We have to keep the facts alive. As she says, facts need testimony to be remembered.
We have to be the witnesses.
This has been a heavy one. I mean, from the 7,000 pages of the Pentagon Papers to the philosophy of the lie, all the way to the fundamental definitions of power and violence, it really forces you to look at the systems we live inside with completely fresh eyes.
It does. It reminds us that the fragility of truth is structurally embedded in modern governance. This tension between image and reality isn't a bug. It's a feature. It isn't going away. It is the political battlefield of our time.
I want to leave you, our listeners, with a final thought to chew on, based directly on Arndt's work. We talked about how she says violence is the opposite of power, that violence appears when power is in jeopardy. So look around at the increasing militarization of our own domestic police forces today. The armored vehicles, the riot gear, the advanced surveillance tech. Does that suggest our government is becoming more powerful? Or does it suggest it is becoming dramatically weaker?
That is the question.
Big thanks to Hannah Arendt for writing Crises of the Republic. If you want to really get your brain working, go check it out from your local library. It is dense, but as you can tell, it is more than worth the effort.
Absolutely. A must-read.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.